Pues bien, ya una vez que corrí bien la tecnología, todo muy bien. Sí, pues ya ahora nada más estamos. Pues que con la presentación para hacer el video. Tú llegas después de la primera, ¿no? Vale, no, todo bien. Ahorita ya en un par de minutos retomamos. Ya. Nos vemos un rato. Sí. Listo.
¿Crees que puedes ayudarme a decirme cuando se nos acaba el tiempo? Tenemos que estar a las 13:20. De estar hablando y demás. We are only missing a link. Copy? Yeah, for sure. Where's a link? Ah. Should we start? Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. Should I say something about myself first? So yeah, I'm also part of the Category colleague, but I write my PhD on philosophy, and I write about Hegel's logic and natural philosophy. So like I've been working on philosophy of technology since I was working with Francisco here at the UNAM, which is a long time ago. But it's always kind of my side project. So today you are going to hear about things I write about when I'm not writing about my dissertation. So I hope also because of the change in the schedule that the topic doesn't go too far away from what you just heard. And I wrote a text, so I'm going to read a text. But I don't know, should I wait a bit more or we just like slowly start? Like 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not my turn. No.
Not yet.
By rule of thumb, usually.
No, there was one person, I think, sitting there. Mm-hmm. But we are broadcasting on YouTube, and some people are looking on YouTube. And actually, Gabriela says she's on YouTube, so I don't know if she's now there, but yeah, there are people on YouTube. Fernando, ¿puedes saber si hay personas en YouTube? Sí. O sea, en general, no solo para como información.
¿Cuál es el canal?
Seminario de Tecnologías Filosóficas. Una.
Ya. Ok.
Creo que soy yo. Voy a dar.
Al rato lo comparto otra vez en Twitter, pero primero tengo que pasar por esta parte.
¿Quieres que lo comparta?
Si puedes.
Ya tenemos 4.
Ok.
Una soy yo. Es que necesitaba la liga para poderlo poner en Twitter.
I need coffee. No, after we are talking about how to solve the coffee problem.
We will have coffee in the afternoon, friends. Later, huh?
We're perfectly fine. We found something.
Yeah, I mean, but it's easier to just walk to the table and then all the way downstairs. After lunch, we'll figure something out.
Okay, I think we can start like
Yes.
this. So it has an introduction. Okay. So this work is the result of a reflection on what has been rather been a practical engagement with the question of how to develop a plural approach to the diversity of histories and contexts in which technology is produced. For the last years, I've been working together with the Research Networks for Philosophy of Technology, directed by Hong Kong-based philosopher Duc Pui. Together with sound artist Huesquinca, we were invited to think about the locality of technology in the context of Latin America. Many questions arise when doing this. How to deal with the colonial past and present and the decoloniality of knowledge that traverses across the territory. Does a decolonial project of the history of technology require a specific approach different from those required in other areas of human production and knowledge? And how much of that methodology is determined by the context in which that history is told? But above all, what was interesting to me is the question concerning the possibility of telling a plural history of technology, while at the same time conserving some sort of unity that allowed us to see all of those kinds of human activities and products as technology. One could reduce this last issue to a question of language, in which case we will be concerned with asking what exactly is that which we name technology. This will imply identifying those things or activities that we name technology and thus transforming the word into a category. But of course, if we are looking beyond the Western tradition or before the colonial rule, then we probably will just miss many activities that in some way or another may be seen as technologies, but not named like that. So I think this question implies an ontological problem, one concerning the question of what technology is at all, or how do we individuate technology. To think about local histories of technology, Duc Pui has brought the concept Cosmotechnics, which he understands as quote, the unification of the cosmic order and the moral order through technical activities. With this concept, Duc Pui is giving an alternative to what he described as a linear and homogenizing history of technology and modernization. Such linear ideas of technology may have given rise to the form in which Western culture developed technologies, as we sometimes identifies in the figure of Elon Musk. On the contrary, with the concept of cosmotechnics, if there are multiple cosmologies and moral orders, there must be as well a plurality of technical activities. a point that has been strengthened in the last years, since we started to speak about technodiversity more than cosmotechnics. In my talk, I would like to address this concept critically and see what we can learn from such a concept and what is still to be done. In the question concerning technology in China, Hui proposes to think of the question of a plurality of technological traditions in the way of a Kantian antinomy. That is, a set of two contradictory sentences where the two sentences can be proven to be right. The antinomy has this form. A, technics is an anthropological universal. B, technics is not anthropological universal. The first assertion is proven right by the fact that all humans at all times have created techniques. Here Hui explains that he means by recurring to one of his main references when it comes to a definition of technology. That is the French philosopher Bernard Stiegler, author of Technics and Time, for whom technics is an extension of somatic functions and the externalization of memory. This human capacity for externalization is identified with a technical tendency. In thesis A, the technical tendency can be expressed differently in different cultures because of the local constraints that this locality gives. So in the thesis A, we have a unitary technical tendency that gets pluralized differently in diverse cultural instances. Thesis B states that techniques are different in different cultures because they are affected by the cosmological understandings of these cultures. Those techniques are autonomous within their cosmological order, that is, do not depend on any other cosmological order to be explained. As we can see, thesis A stresses the unity of techniques, and thesis B, its plurality. The question, however, is whether this is indeed an antinomy. As just said, antinomies have to hold two contradictory sentences. But to do so, any of those sentences can't be reduced to the other one, since in that case, we will be dealing with only one sentence. I suspect that this is what happens in this case, and some other problems I would like to point to later have to do with the possibility of this collapsing of thesis A and B. I think first, it will be important to clarify in which sense Hui speaks of universality in each sentence. In thesis A, as we saw, it is clear that universality names extension, which can also be reformulated as if there are humans, then there are techniques. This is in principle not problematic, but it becomes problematic as soon as we speak of a technical tendency. The tendency seems to rather speak of unity or homogeneity. There is one tendency that gets diversified according to particular cultural differences. So when the second thesis contradicts the first one, it is not clear which sense of universality is being contradicted. The second thesis emphasizes the autonomy of the plural developments, so it seems to contradict the sense of universality as unity, but not the one as an extension. Many cultures that show different and autonomous developments in technology are anyways all of them development technology. So thesis B is collapsing into thesis A. I think that this point, that points to the main question that for me emerges out of Hui's concept of cosmotechnics. The different histories and developments of technology mean the impossibility of universality, or what sort of universal is Hui going against? Recurring to philosopher Gilbert Simondon, who in an unpublished small essay with the title Technical Mentality has spoken of a technical thought to refer to schemes of action that develop into values and that is marked by a given technical condition. Hui also refers to a technical thought, but in his context, he brings thought in relation to myths. Technical thought does require not only to account for certain practices that will be labeled as technology, but for the form in which those practices are embedded within the cosmology of a culture. Thus, according to Hui, to approach the technical thought of a given culture, it will be necessary to look into its local myths, and thus to the larger world order in which techniques are embedded within that culture and its other series of practices, religious, moral, social practices. But above all, how techniques are entangled within local forms of life. Thus, when in the question concerning technology in China, he states that there has not been a technical thought in China, he's not negating the existence of human practices for the exteriorization of somatic functions, but rather saying that the role that techniques plays in Chinese cosmology has never been the same as the one they have in the Western. To make this point, he refers to the Prometheus myth, which for him is paradigmatic of the Western cosmological view of technology. And I quote, "Unlike Greek mythology, then, in which the Titan revolted against the gods by bestowing fire and means of subsistence upon human beings, thus raising them above animals, in Chinese mythology, there was no such rebellion and no such transcendence granted. This endowment is seen instead as owing to the benevolence of the ancient sages." In Hui's account, the Promethean myth shows a particularity of the human with regard to all other animals, and this is given precisely by owning the technique of producing fire. This story contains the value of a certain human superiority, but also of a technology that allows for such superiority to be the case. In Hui's view, this will explain the linear progressive form in which Western technological development has taken place in Western technoscience. Thus, the Heideggerian diagnosis in his essay, The Question Concerning Technology, which inspires Hui's title, will give an accurate account of the form of being of technology as Gestell or enframing, that is, in the last instant, as a form of domination over nature. Thus, approaching any other history of technology with other cosmologies will not necessarily correspond to this picture. Hence, Hui's proposal to rethink the question concerning technology, or the being of technology in other cosmologies. This is the work done by the concept Cosmotechnics, as we can read in this passage. I believe that the concept of Cosmotechnics allows us to trace different technicities and contributes to opening up the plurality of relations between techniques, mythology, and cosmology, and thereby to the embracing of the different relations between the human and techniques inherited from different mythologies and cosmologies. In his book, Hui refers specifically to the tradition of the Tao. He is, however, aware that this is a simplification of Chinese cosmology. However, I find it interesting that he never tells us what are the criteria to individuate a cosmology. It seems to have to do with myths. In the context of Latin America, however, this starts to get tricky. First of all, because although there are some similarities among indigenous mythologies and worldviews, they are hardly reducible to one another. But second, because the colonial history and the many attempts to erase those worldviews at different stages of colonial and post-colonial periods, and the many phases of imperialism that cut across the history of the territory. So, for example, just to name one, Bolívar Echeverría, a philosopher of the Mexican tradition, has proposed to think of the specific case of indigenous people who were brought during the early colonial period to cities to work in building those very cities and the Christian churches that serve as centers for the erasure of indigenous forms of life. In Echeverria's view, those people were forced to adapt to the religious practices brought by the Spanish rule because otherwise they would have not survived. So according to him, they were not just dominated and forced into Christianity. I mean, they were, but not only, but chose to adapt to this form as a strategy for survival. Echeverria names this strategy Baroque because it implies a certain development of form in which the form is independent of the structure. Thus, in Echeverria's work, this is what happened to the specific development of coloniality. It was transformed into a simulacrum, in acting as a Christian in a form that allows for survival. But this is seen as a simulacrum because it does not belong to any original to which it can refer to. It is not my aim to explore Echeverria's work in here, but only to set an example of something that could be seen as a cosmology, but it hardly can be assigned a myth, since it is a form of life that emerged as a strategy for survival. So the general question will be, if we talk about individuating cosmotechnics or cosmologies via myths, what myths are we talking about? Hui opts for a pluralist view derived from his engagement with the work of anthropologist Eduardo Viveros de Castro, who by researching on the worldview of Amerindian people has proposed a multi-perspectivism that grounds a multinaturalism. So if we turn to the antonomy he refers to, he seems to offer a solution by turning to thesis B, that is a pluralist approach to technology. This pluralist approach will be fragmented by the cosmological orders in which those technologies emerge. But as we have seen, not only do we get the problem that the antinomy seems to rather be one sentence in the thesis B collapses into A, but we also now get the issue of how to individuate cosmologies and differentiate myths as well as the question of the colonial history and its bifurcation of cosmologies, not only by mythologists, but by their approaches to colonial power and the coloniality of knowledge. On the other hand, it turns out interesting that we criticize post-colonial projects because they do not engage with technology. And it may be true that many do not do so, but the question for me will be, are they not? Or are we already blinded to see when they are engaging with local technologies and knowledge? All these issues bring me to what I think is the main issue to deal with. When we speak of local technologies, what do we mean by locality? Is it the same to speak of geographical or cultural locality and technical locality? I tend to think that it is not the same and that this may be one of the issues at the center of the mentioned alleged antinomy. In the context of a better understanding what a technical locality may be, I've been interested in the work of philosopher of technology, J.W. Simondon, who is as well one of the main sources of his work. Specifically, in the context of this question on technical locality, I think it's interesting to look at Simondon's chapter on invention in one of his major works, Individuation in Light of the Notions of Form and Information. Here, Simondon is concerned with how technologies enter a social order. So he proposed to think of invention not as the work of a genius or particular individual with some ideas in her mind, but rather as a process of negotiation between technical and social normativity. Social normativity names the cultural values of a community. This is given by the practices of that community. Technical normativity is given by the material requirements of techniques. It describes the real possibilities of a given technology. In this sense, they are universal rules, since all technical objects with X specification must act or react in the same way, like the rotation velocity of a motor or the pressure in a pump. Technical normativity refers to the material constraints of that technology. Thus, it is not dependent on cultural values, as Simondon makes clear in this passage. It is valid in that it truly exists in itself and not in the community. The adoption or the refusal of a technical object by a society does not mean anything for or against the validity of this object. The technical normativity is intrinsic and absolute. We can even notice that it is by the technique that the penetration of a new normativity in a closed community is made possible. And quote, since the technical normativity is autonomous, it enables to open up a community, that is to adjust to the constraints put by that technology. This, however, does not mean that technologies do not have anything to do with the cultural normativity, since they precisely modify the system of values of a given society. Thus, for Simondon, it is precisely the independence of the pole of technical normativity and the social one what enables to understand how techniques enter the social. And here again, a quote, every technical device modifies in a certain measure the community and institutes a function that makes possible the advent of other technical devices. It is inserted therefore in a continuity that does not exclude the change but stimulates it. Since the technical normativity is autonomous, it enables to open up a community, that is to adjust to the constraints put by the technology. This, however, thus for Simondon is precisely, okay, sorry, I'm reading the same again. This is where I see the potential to think through the problem of locality in technology. It requires looking at the material constraints of technologies more than myths. Although I agree that myths are a huge source of knowledge, I just don't think they are enough to think through techniques or what local techniques may be. But since Hui has chosen thesis B, the autonomy of the plurality in the autonomy of the plurality of techniques, and he rejects the universality of techniques, then he can only explore local technologies concerning cultural normativity. In this sense, it is curious that when criticizing post-colonial theories, because they do not engage with the question concerning techniques, he seems to fall into a similar trap. If techniques is in its autonomous plural context are researched by myths, what makes this research specific about technology? I think Hu is right in pointing that we need to understand the cultural context in which a technique appears, but it seems that more is needed to understand as well the constraints and potential of that technology beyond its cultural context. Maybe if we don't treat the thesis, both theses as an antinomy, but as complementary, we could localize technologies by looking both at the cultural and technical normativity. Thank you. Ali.
Excellent, very interesting. I admire and resist or how should I call it, analytic, your analytic university. I would like, I think the starting point of this antinomy. It's very interesting, very insightful. So you build up here problematization, dialectic problematization based on its antinomy. Techniques is an anthropological universal. Techniques is not an anthropological universal. But it seems to me that this type of problematization might suggest, if not imply, some sort of anthropocentrism. Because techniques is not does not make something like an anthropological difference, right? Non-human animals display techniques too, right? So from a rather, let's call it biocentric perspective, where if you accept with me that techniques are at work in non-human animals, it's something displayed by the non-human animals as well. Does this antinomy still maintain the insightfulness that you unfurled?
So you mean if we don't assume the anthropological part?
I think there's two questions. Would you think that techniques is only anthropological, only a human thing, whatever the human may be? And then, if you would agree with me that this is not the case, that techniques does not mark an anthropological difference, would you reconsider the type of insight that this axiomatic starting point led you to?
Yeah. I think it's a very good observation also that he framed this like as like the thesis, they include this anthropological thing, because he himself is trying to say that with this critique to the Promethean myth, that technology is not like something that puts humans above all of the others. So it's interesting that at the end, he somehow thinks that it's particular for humans. I wouldn't agree. I think you're right. Like animals also have techniques. Maybe we relate differently to those techniques because we can reflect, for example, on the kind of techniques that we produce.
But so can some animals, and surely each species.
Yeah, but they don't produce theory. They don't have philosophy of technology. So this is what I mean with reflecting, like systematize our knowledge about technology. So yeah, definitely, I would say there is a difference. There is a difference how we produce technology or techniques and how animals have them. But this difference doesn't mean that it puts us above, and it doesn't also like make it exclusive for humans to produce techniques. But it's interesting that he poses as an anthropological universal. So like it's just a given that it's a human activity. Yeah. Yeah, David?
Thank you very much. I really like how you answered this example. Came out of and I haven't read the book of Euclid, unfortunately. I only had read reviews, so I can't go into it. But first, I have to say that I mean, you do not agree, but I do also not agree with this. With saying that the European idea of technology is so much related to the Promethean myth. It's completely wrong, because from a historical point of view, you can't make this argument. There's a certain point when this Promethean myth becomes very, very important, and that's the Enlightenment. So in the Enlightenment, the human subject detaches from the divine power and becomes the subject that is able to create tools. And these tools he is able to create not by the divine power, because he's a subject and he has autonomy. So with all this game, this kind of Promethean myth becomes very important. And this is also, I just wanted to say that because not in the idea that this commitment is always at the center of reading technology. But then it becomes interesting because also in the European tradition, myths play a certain role how we see technology. I mean, in the scholastic and other philosophies, this is really the question. I mean, for example, like authors like Nicolas Foucault, who are not very popular because they are medieval authors. But the question is, what's the power behind the creation of a table? Apparently, the table has no role model in nature, so you cannot say that it's an imitation of nature. It is even something divine from the so you cannot say that this is a kind of representation of divine power. So how do we explain the presence of tables? This is just a spectrum. This was more iconic. But here's my question.
Oh.
And that's the simondance. And I had and also to think how you finish this report with this tension between technical normativity and specific methodology. And Simondon has, and correct me if I'm wrong, so much better than I am. And Simondon has a certain answer in this book, Locality collective. In this last chapter, it's about the invention. And at the center of this chapter is the engineer. So the engineer is a very important person, but not, and this is the interesting point, not as the anthropologically special figure that creates technology, but somehow he's a kind of harmonizer in between. He has to absorb all these tensions of social normativity and material normativity, and yeah, and now you could say, of course, this is a strange idea of an engineer, but the interesting thing is that somehow Simondon sees this void in the genealogy of the technical objects. Yeah? And my question would be, what would fill the void in kind of in your project on both technologies? Because apparently, if you explain something like technology, South American countries, you would have start with we have to say engineer something like that.
Yeah.
So what could it be? Or would it be an interesting question for
Yeah. Thank you for both, like the comment and the question. About the comment, I didn't say much about this in this text, but I also sometimes go in that direction about like why is myth so important for Dupuy, and so I think it's not so uninteresting if one thinks that myths are like in Western philosophy always seen as that what is beyond rationality, or like the order of the rationality. And I think his point is trying to be that if you think about myths of technology, you see that which is like contained in the activity itself. So that's why like Elon Musk is a good example. So he doesn't have a philosophy of technology, but he has kind of has embodied one. And this is like what you can get to when you look at myths. Like these things that are not explicit, no one says what are the ideas of technology for in Apple, but there are some concepts there at work. So it's not the same as theorizing actively and making philosophy of technology, but there are ideas there, and these ideas you can pick out with myths. And I think this is not a terrible idea. I'm not sure myths are the way to look into those conceptions we have explicitly, implicitly. So I think that's where he's trying to go. Like the ideas of technology we have as a society that are implicit, and how do you get there? And I think, yeah, it is a mistake to like look so much into myths, but I think it's a philosophy bias. So that, like, for example, in philosophy, like someone as Heidegger, he made myths like the most important thing you have to look at. So I think it's a philosophy bias to think that by looking at narratives and how you, like a society explains itself, it's enough to like look into these implicit ideas. But to me, that's a philosophy bias. And related to the second point, yeah, you're right, like the engineer is a very weird figure. That's why I was saying it's not a genius, but in a way, like has the capacity to recognize the potentiality of technology and develop it in the right direction, the kind of like these things. And it's also not like because the engineer has this knowledge and can do it. No, it's like it recognizes like the opportunities of the technology. And in my case, I don't know, good question. I guess there will be space for like interesting people to talk to, like exactly these non-academic people. So maybe those are the people who need to explain us, like where are the opportunities of those technologies? Because right now, like academically, well, maybe it's a bit like we only have the same discourse, so it's maybe the things we already know about those technologies. And the second one is like in the industries, well, we see what happens when we let them tell us what are the potentialities of a technology. So maybe, yeah, that's an opportunity for having non-academic actors in there, but I have no idea. Yeah, that's a great question.
Just one thing, I see the point that maybe also I think because the Simondorfi lobby is maybe also somehow in an almost religious way, it guards the knowledge. And how is the knowledge then distributed in these kind of examples of local technology?
Yeah.
Well, I would very much expect that it's not kind of concentrated in one figure.
And one actor.
However,
Yeah.
How much will we put into that?
Yeah, like having just one subjectivity as the subjectivity for developing technology, maybe that's part of the mistake.
Yeah, or the basis
On the other hand.
okay.
Okay, there were many questions, but I'm like moderating at the same time as talking, so please just talk.
Okay, yeah, it's a question to know your very articulate, and I really this sort of, I mean, you ask when you say that we need to understand the context, or cultural context of which technology is, and going against this sort of just seeing this sort of philosophical bias, just sort of looking at it, and then you propose looking at technological constraints. Can you elaborate a little on that? And I'm curious about this idea and what it implies and how it relates to other sort of terms. There's also within the infrastructures by which something appears, and does the notion of constraints relate to this question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess like infrastructure is a good concept, like to put into the direction of materialities of technology. I always like to use example of like a society that has a river like close by, and they have to go to the river to get water like each day. So they have a system of organizing how to go to this river to get the water, and then at some point they develop a pump to pump the water directly into the village. So this new technology kind of now materializes the activity of going to the river and getting the water, but it also has certain constraints because it only works with a certain pressure, with a certain altitude. So those constraints are material constraints that are given also by the geography itself, and so that's why I say like maybe infrastructure is a good concept for it, because it like a cultural practice is now shaped also by this very material constraints, like where did you build a technology, where does this technology is possible, and it's possible to just move this technology into another geographical cultural context and make it work exactly the same, or is this already the mistake? And we have to rethink probably like how do we translate technologies from one context to the other. And that's why I like when Simondon says like it opens up a community, because it brings all of these things that happen, like the translation of this community going to the river and whatever, all of these values are now like translated into a technology. And when we take it somewhere else, we take also all of these values involved. So this may be like an analysis of what is contained both culturally. Sorry? What is both culturally and materially, that's what I'm interested in, like how this like transformation of one technology is not just adjusting it to the lower cost or whatever. No, it has to do with a cultural practice and geographical location and all of these things. That's what the question for me is, like, what is this locality? It implies sort of those things. Yeah. Yeah. you had also a question?
Ah, sí, de hecho, Francisco, vas a enviar una pregunta. Ajá. Entonces, te la leo. Es, ¿cómo entonces podríamos entender la tecnología si no depende de una concepción antropológica?
Okay. So the question is, how can we understand technology if it's not dependent on an anthropological conception and it's not universal, right? So I'm not sure, I'm not trying to say it's not universal. So part of my issue is that I want a certain universality, but this universality is given by the technology itself, like what I was saying, like the materiality. So there are universal rules for how a certain, I don't know, a certain material reacts in the heat. And this for me is universal. I have no problems calling this universal. But yeah, if he's asking for my own concept of technology, well, this is what I work on. I'm not having one right now.
Thanks. This is very interesting. Also, I mean, I've been reading about, I think about, hadn't heard about this Chinese philosopher who was taking Heidegger to this further, I guess. You said that, so I want to ask a little bit more. Okay, but because you said that Chinese conception of technology didn't resonate with Heidegger's description of modern technology. Yes, that's true when you look at Chinese myth. But what if you look at communism, for instance? Because I guess in my as naive reading, communism would actually be a very good fit, you know, still. So I mean, and I guess it also speaks to your idea about what define locality. Is that only, or is it also like state-produced knowledge or state or ideological ideas about technology? As communists that we are about technology. So how is he like?
Yeah.
I mean, how is our ideas of technology informed both by myth and systems? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess, to be fair, I would say that so in the book we also talks about history and how to do a history of these pre-modern technologies in China. So that's what he's concerned with, precisely because he thinks that many of the conceptions of technology in China right now have to do more with this linearity, homogeneity idea coming from the Western. So he thinks that if you want to make a history of how technology was in China before this Westernization, well, you have to do this thing, like look at the Cosmotechnics and all of this.
So it's
So,
like making Chinese conception of technology great again, so to speak.
yes, sort of.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, yes, sort of.
Yeah.
But this is where I find tricky. So I understand how important it is to look at those conceptions where I was saying, like in the pre-colonial time. But I'm unsure that we can do this because precisely like technology has developed in these other ways and in those territories and has affected those populations that had those myths, but maybe like right now are not believing in those myths anymore, are believing in the myth of technology saving us and extending our lives forever. So like, how do we deal with those two things? But yeah, I would say like for him, it's very important to like also reconceptualize what we think about modernity or what modernity may be precisely in the context of China. But yeah, but the failure for me or the mistake is relies precisely in this, like it doesn't allow us for more complex histories. And I guess in a certain way, it forces to homogenize China too, or homogenize like Latin America, for example. What I was saying, like we have so many myths, like which myth do you want? Or which language do you want? It's like, so for me, it would be like an impossible task. Like, how do we do this? Maybe we need, that's why another form to go through, because like this one, maybe not wouldn't work, like just the history of how colonial power came into Latin America, it won't work. So that's for me the problem, like to try to look for other forms of locality. So yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it's the second thing about the multi-diverse. They are not. But I was thinking that when material and implementations, it's a similar situation, right? Each implementation, you have hydrogen. I was wondering if it's not a. I have a background in philosophy, so universal is something that universe, but also I was thinking that going to concreteness or light, for example, the water pump. How much do you attach from the abstract idea of as a universal, right? Water pump, and we can talk about the intention of the water pump, how it's needs and everything, right? But gravity becomes a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to phrase the question. I really like the idea of going to the example, but then I don't know how to
Yeah, but for example, so I guess I get your point. So it's a bit of like what kind of universal we were left with if we do this. I guess like for me, it's not so complicated, or I'm not scared to think of the universal as something that becomes concrete, because the universal is concrete. So like the problem when we say universal, and I think it's the enemy of Dupuy, is that he thinks that so universal means kind of abstraction too. Like it happens in reflection, it happens in theory, and then you do it, or it happens in thought, and then you do it. So it kind of is a sort of abstraction thing. And of course, knowledge means it has to do with a lot of abstractions, but it depends at what level are you talking about. So if you're producing philosophy of technology, probably like you are in the level of abstraction necessary. But if you are thinking about specific infrastructures, I'm not sure that it's impossible to think of, I don't know, like the form in which all humans, for example, bring water to their places. And this is universal. All humans somehow need to have water in their villages. So like now the question is like how it's concretely done. And that's the difference. So that's not an issue that philosophy of technology will deal with, but it's like the concrete form in which the universal bringing water to the village is instantiated. So that's for me, that's why for me it's not that problematic to talk about universality, but because universality is not always just like erasure of differences, but probably we can talk about those differences as the universal. I think Stefan was, but is this, yeah?
And then please. Maybe to the term itself, technology and technique. It's a Eurocentric term, and in its Greek origins, it meant the use of logos, of reason, Western ideas to produce something. And so I'm wondering if it's, I like this idea of what you said, that like certain technologies make like the local value problem, which I think is very convincing point to make. But maybe it's wrong to call them technologies, because these local values might not have been produced locals. It's a very concept. So I'm just just going around my head, kind of like maybe that the bias that you were talking about is more in the concept, in the category, using like technology as like an analytical category to look at these localities. Maybe that's already a problem. Of course, I don't have the solution, but maybe to be aware of this would help get this problem to universality of knowledge. It's like a half comment, half question.
Yeah. No, thank you. I guess like for me, it's important to separate concepts and categories or words. And of course, you are right that technology and techniques have to do with techne, and it's like this Greek thing, and people tell the story. Yeah, Western culture comes from Greece, and I get your point. But for me, it's not so problematic to call certain activity technology, but if this word does not imply, so if the word does not imply the concept of Western technology. So that's why it's important to separate those things.
That's I understand, and I know how concepts whatever can change their meaning, but still, I mean, more or less ingrained in its semantic DNA.
But it's not fixed. That's the nice part about language. That's not fixed. So we can change the sense in which we talk about technology. So that will be exactly this project, to expand the concept of what we understand to be technology. So then, like, in whose term right now is like behind technology, progress, and I don't know, like human evolution and things like this. And this is what we connect with this Western idea of technology. But like we can open up our concept and think about other activities, human activities, that doesn't look like a sci-fi film, but maybe they are technology. And this is what for me is interesting. But of course, if you apply the concept and you try to look, that's why I was saying that will fail. If you try to look to other cultures and say, well, they didn't even have the word technology or techniques or techno. Well, you're already lost. Like, what are you looking for? There won't be any activity that looks like technology. But if you like try to expand the idea of what you understand as technology, and you think of certain organized activities that, I don't know, externalize cultural values, maybe that is a better concept of technology we can work with. And actually, there is a project I really like in Brazil, and they are called the Technosphere. They work on the Technosphere, like rural Technosphere. And they talk about Technosphere, which will be a very Western concept. But they are like working on the Amazonian, and they invite local people to like teach what they are, like the local technologies. So it's like, I don't know, like a knots technology, like different, like I don't know, like a plantation technologies, and you like this is how you open up your concept. And now when you say technosphere, it doesn't sound like this weird thing, Western thinking, but like this rural technosphere. So that will be for me the work, because otherwise it becomes impossible. So if we say we're not now allowed to use this word anymore, then it becomes. Yeah, but yeah, that's what, you get my point. So.
Very
Related.
and I'm going to only also because it's very brief. I think I had, in my own words, the same question as Philip. And certainly that's very important that we are opinion making. I think you're making also very good point about that, pointing out to the flexibility of language. Language is not fixed. So many paradigms are not fixed, and so on. For that matter, I'd like to point out just to explain that, the term logos created all kinds of dualities, because typically Western modern interpretation of the classical Greek logos is very, very narrow, close to what logos meant to classical among which the Western modern philosophy is one very narrow reading, quite untypical. The change is very biased because of the technology. So, what to say this? So,
Sorry. So it's a really interesting conversation, and my point fits really precisely in it, because I found it really interesting that we can use this notion of Simondon as this innovation or invention is a balancing of technical and cultural values. In the same way, we can think about this question of technology. It's a form, a specific form, no, cultural value, how to think about techniques. And therefore, it's also at the same time a specific form of reflection on technique. And therefore, I would say it's really important to see and really precisely to dig in what about these specific cultural norms and technical norms are at place? Because and then the second point is who is the ones or are the ones engineering. So I would say, and thank you, Dana, for this reminder of Simondon, that it's the engineer as an interesting figure is the question. For me, not that the idea is whether we should think in a plurality of engineers, because then it's not one specific role, but there are specific role models which are not a part of or what is the arena in which these the negotiation between cultural and technical normativity can take place. And so therein this question of community seems to me might be, so simply spoken, two analytical options. So that you have simple one engineer as a role at place, not creating one option out of such a negotiation. And then it might be easier to transform what's coming out from one place to another, because it's more in itself like a universal form. But if at the same time dozens of engineers take place, it might turn out really getting more difficult. And this is with regard to complex engineering processes or complex technological development processes, often the case. And so if we create infrastructures, then in many cases there is a lot of negotiation between cultural and normative, cultural and technical normativity, and then it might turn out really difficult to transfer one solution from one locality to another, because then a true complex backpack of negotiations is therein, and then it's a different form. But nevertheless, I found it really interesting how you put it. And I would say, with regard to this ideas of negotiation between cultural and technical normativity, I would say also with regard to this varieties of science, it's really that form, so that we do not have technical things, but epistemic things. That we can say, well, what about the negotiation between cultural normativity and epistemic things? And it seems to be close together, and in the social epistemic technical context, it might that we say, well, cultural normativity as well as epistemic and technical things we take into consideration. So that's more thinking with, not really a question, but perhaps there's a question for you.
Yeah, but I was actually thinking when you were saying about the engineers and having more engineers and how complex it would be, of an example, but a completely different epistemic branch. Because I saw in the one museum in Cologne, there was like one of these discussions of like giving back the objects that were stolen to certain cultures, and then like one would say like, well, but then the museum it gets empty at some point. But what they were doing was also like inviting the people of those cultures to like speak at the museum and explain what actually the objects that are there, because like people speculate about these objects, but you have like experts and like really like everyday life experts on these objects, and they can really tell you like every element, what it means. So like for me, like this is the question, like who is involved in the process of decision making? So do you have the relevant people there or not? And maybe this is something that like, in art is getting done, so why not like technology development is doing this, or assessment is doing this? Like who are the ones involved? Are the engineers the only ones we need, or what is our idea of engineers? Is subjectivity only the only one we have, or can we open up this concept of like engineering and maybe we need other actors there? So like just thinking of the parallel of, yeah, what happens when you invite other people? Would they be like be regarded as experts too, or it's just like, oh well, citizens? Like sometimes speaking about citizens involved in science is more like to say, well, we invite the normal people, but is these normal people like experts? Like they are experts in certain things. So like maybe that's what is important, like to open up this idea of the engineer.
Yeah, but that's a good point, because I would say with regard to living labs, the very idea, if you put it really precisely, then people are citizens which are affected by specific problems. They are experts to their problem, and then therefore to the questions they have, and therefore it's important how they shape the question, and next to starting of engineering. And in engineering, we have a specific definition of problem and not question how we solve it, and strategies how to solve it. And therefore, I would say that the interesting thing with regard to living labs might be not to think in a plurality of engineers doing not this problem solving process and really conducting it. And therefore, we think this hierarchical idea of here are the experts, there the bare citizens, or the bare lay people, which are never there. So they have specific competences. And therefore, it's that would be a really interesting thing, perhaps a good strategy to dig deeper in these collaboration formats.
And maybe just one more comment in relation to your first comment, although Philip just left, because relating to the idea, to the using the concept technology. So I also don't want to say that it's not important to know what are the names for technology or technological practices in other cosmologies. But I will say that it will be a bit like we will lose a lot of potential for critique on the Western concept of technology if we don't use this concept and look what is behind it. What have we say that it means? So that's why it's another reason to stay with this one. Just let's look at what it's implying it in the Western world. So maybe that's a reason just not to throw it out. We still need to criticize that. Okay. So yeah.
No.
If that's it, I think we have.
For lunch.
It's about 2 minutes if you want.
No, I agree. And then also like criticizing and getting away from this kind of very functional technology. And then I mean, of course you can keep the concept, but you can. There's a certain tendency, for example, in other disciplines right now, with the mind of computer science, who are very obsessed with the practices of tools. Basically, people also claim it is technology, but like all, for example, things like cognitive archaeology. So they try to explain how the formation of a cell has been developed by the interaction with the tool, and not like there's a certain idea of the cell, like in classic interpretations of Greek myths, that is abstract. So more or less, Odysseus has been made by he was sailing, and not because he said I will sail with this ship. Like that. And I just wanted to say that they talk a lot about practices and tools, and you can also frame it as a kind of certain approach to theorizing technology, offering other perspectives of one topic. Maybe, I don't know if it's a compromise, but you should be critical and also cautious about the background of technology, of the concept, but you can also offer other perspectives. I think that's what like these non-Eurocentric perspectives of technology really enrich this concept. Because I don't know if other fields have it. Yeah, sometimes you are really bored if you have all the time go through this kind of millennium background, and then again you go
Yeah. Tired.
And you have to spell, of course. India, that's important, but yeah, there are a lot of out there.
Just speaking a bit further on this, because I found it really important because we have to overcome these simple contradictions between, well, that's Western European and that's the other European. Because to do so, we need different forms of describing what's going on. And I found this, what you presented here, a good way to do so. And it would be the same, and that we uncover a specific dimension which underlie these tensions, for example, with technical and cultural normativities, and how they are articulated, and how they work together. Sometimes they are highly related, sometimes they are not, and it depends from these different contexts where we are in, and as you mentioned in regard to this governance dimension, we have to be more precise or to get another level, to come to a level where we can describe it, where we can say, well, it offers a better understanding of how it works in different cultures. But coming and at the same time overcoming these questions. Well, that's colonialism, post-colonialism, that's Eurocentric. It's one round we heard, we discussed 20 years now, and I would say it would be good to take the next step.
Yeah.
Because it's narrowing down or understanding.
Yeah, I think it's a critique that was super necessary, but as you say, like we still want to the affirmative part. Okay, so not this way, but how do we want? And I think that's part of the effort. At least for you, I would say that he's trying to do this. Like, what do we actually want to produce as philosophy of technology? If not that, okay, then what? Yeah. So who's hungry? Exactly. So should we finish it? Okay. Yeah, thank you for the questions.
Yeah, thank you.